His finger was around the trigger of it, so he pulled the trigger, and then I got shot in the chest. Just the amount of neighborhoods and gang, and gang environments we walked through just to get to school every day, was just, crazy.
Ever wonder which rappers actually live the life they rap about? While some rappers are all talk and no action, others were deep in the street life before blowing up. Here are 25 rappers who were former gang members. Kicking things off with Snoop Dogg. Back in the day, before the fame, before the weed business, before he was everybody's uncle, he was just Calvin Broadus, a youngin' trying to make it through the streets of Long Beach. Back in the late 80s, gang culture wasn't just a thing, it ran the city, and Snoop, he was right there in it, rolling with the Rollin' 20s Crips. It wasn't like he was any kingpin, but he was pushing weight, mostly weed, trying to survive like a lot of Crip affiliates back then. The county jail was looking like a revolving door for him, but between the madness, music was calling him. When he wasn't on the block, he was freestyling at house parties. One of his tapes got into the hand of Dr. Dre, and just like that, his whole life shifted. By 1993, Doggy Style was about to drop, and Snoop was climbing to the top, until the murder case hit. Philip Woodamariam ended up dead, and Snoop, along with his bodyguard, got charged with murder. For 3 years, the media had a field day, painting him as the blue rag wearing menace of hip hop. But in 1996, he beat the case, and from that moment, he knew the streets wasn't worth it no more. Instead of doubling down, Snoop bossed up. He started stepping away from the Rollin' 20s, focusing on music, business, and peace. He launched Snoop Youth Football League, linking up with Bloods and Crips through music, and even made peace with Suge Knight, something folks thought they'd never see. Today, Snoop is bigger than ever. He owns Death Row Records, got a multi-million-dollar cannabis empire, and just locked a huge deal with Universal Music Group. The Game, Cedar Block Piru Bloods. If anybody really lived for what they rapped, it's The Game. Born and raised in Compton, he wasn't just surrounded by Bloods and Crips. His older brother was already a Cedar Block Piru, so Game was practically born into it. Before rap, he was in the trenches, period. Hustling, getting into it with enemies, dodging bullets, and sending some back. But in 2001, the streets almost took him all the way out. Game got shot 5 times, left bleeding out in his own crib after a drug deal turned deadly. 3 days in a coma. When he woke up, he knew it was time to switch lanes. Lying in that hospital bed, he ain't just sit there. He started soaking in classic hip hop albums. When he finally picked up a mic, it was different. Raw. No gimmicks, straight pain. Dr. Dre saw the vision, put him on Aftermath, and by 2005, he dropped The Documentary, one of the hardest albums of the 2000s. But just cause he got on, didn't mean that the streets let go. His beef with 50 Cent and G-Unit turned real, with gunshots popping out outside of Hot 97 in New York. But over time, Game wised up. He started focusing on his kids, business, running Black Wall Street Records, working on his final album, and staying far away from the politics that almost got him killed. 50 Cent. If there's one rapper who really came from the trenches and flipped the whole game, it's 50 Cent. Born Curtis Jackson, he grew up in Southside Jamaica, Queens, a neighborhood where you either ran the streets or got ran over by them. By the time he was 12, he was already hustling, selling crack on the block, learning the game from older heads. His mother, Sabrina, was deep into it too, but she got killed when he was just 8 years old, leaving him to figure things out on his own. By the late 90s, he was catching drug charges left and right, with the feds watching him heavily. That's when music started calling his name, but before he could really take off, the streets pulled him back in the worst way possible. In 2000s, right outside his grandma's house, he got shot 9 times in a setup that almost ended everything. Bullets hit his face, hands, legs, chest, but somehow, 50 survived. Lying in that hospital bed, jaw wired shut, he made a decision: music or death. He went from pushing weight to pushing bars, linking up with Eminem and Dr. Dre, and in 2003, Get Rich or Die Trying dropped. From that moment, everything changed. But even with success, the gang ties and beef followed. The G-Unit vs. Murder Inc. war got real, with shootouts, stabbings, and real street tension. Over time though, he moved smarter. 50 Cent ain't looking back. He's running Hollywood, dropping new shows, signing multi-million-dollar deals, and turning G-Unit into a full media empire. Ice-T. Born Tracy Morrow in South Central LA, Ice-T was just a kid trying to figure out how to survive in a city run by gang culture. Ice's parents died when he was still a teen, leaving him to fend for himself. While most kids his age was worried about school, Ice was out there trying to eat, running with other Hoover Crips, and getting his money however he could. In the late 70s, Ice joined the army, hoping to get out of the hood. But when he came back, LA was worse than ever. Crack had the city in a chokehold, gangs were taking over, and Ice was right back in the mix. But this time, he was plotting his next move. Music became his way out. Ice started spitting real street stories, breaking down life in South Central, but in a way nobody has ever heard before. His music wasn't about glorifying the streets, it was about exposing them. In 1987, he dropped 6 in the Morning, and just like that, gangsta rap was born. But his biggest impact? Cop Killer. That song shook America and had politicians calling for his head and made Ice-T public enemy #1. But he stood on business, never backed down, and proved that gangsta rap wasn't just music, it was a movement. By the mid-90s, Ice had fully distanced himself from the gang life, stepping into acting business and advocacy. He's still playing Detective Tutuola on Law & Order SUV, making millions off of TV, and using his platform to speak on gang violence. Nipsey Hussle. Unlike some who gets pulled into gang life, Nipsey embraced it early, not just for survival, but because it was his community, his family. Before rap, he was hustling heavy, selling mixtapes and more just to get by. He was out there in the streets, doing what he had to do, but he wasn't moving recklessly. He was always about business. Even as a young Crip, he had bigger dreams, and music became his way out. His early tapes like Saucin' Boy started getting buzz, and Nip took notes from independent legends like Master P, learning how to move without a label. As his name grew, so did his vision. He wasn't just trying to get rich, he wanted to build wealth for his hood. He bought back the block, opened the Marathon clothing store, and put his homies on real business moves. But being a street legend comes with enemies, and Nipsey had his share of beefs. In 2019, tragedy struck. Nipsey was gunned down in front of his own store, the same place he built to uplift his community. Lil Wayne. Before the diamond chains and platinum plaques, he was Dwayne Carter, a kid growing up in the Holly Grove neighborhood of New Orleans, one of the roughest spots in the city. Wayne wasn't born into the Bloods, but as he got older and deeper into the rap game, he started repping red heavy. His connection to the mob Piru Bloods became a part of his image, and he never shed away from throwing it up in his music. But let's be real, Wayne was never a real street soldier. His focus was always music, not the gang war. Still, Wayne had his share of real street moments. At age 12, he shot himself in the chest, nearly dying. While some say it was an accident, Wayne later admitted that it was a suicide attempt, showing just how rough his life was as a kid. Once Cash Money Records scooped him up, it was over. By the time The Block Is Hot dropped in 1999, Wayne was already on his way to the top. Over the years, he made his blood affiliation louder, especially in songs like I Am Not a Human Being, where he rapped, I'm a grown blood. But as time went on, Wayne moved smarter. The gang ties became less important, and his focus shifted to music, skateboarding, and business, becoming one of the biggest names in hip-hop, running Young Money, and expanded his empire. Birdman. If Cash Money Records was a kingdom, Birdman was the kingpin. But before the music, Birdman was deep into the streets, running with the Bloods and getting his money by any means. He was moving weight and making plays in the city. But the real come up started when he decided to put his energy into music instead of the block. In 1991, he co-founded Cash Money Records with his brother Slim, and by the late 90s, they had built a roster that would change hip-hop forever. Juvenile, BG, Turk, and Lil Wayne. But even after Cash Money blew up, Birdman never left the gang world behind. He kept his blood ties strong, linking with West Coast sets, and making sure his affiliations was known in the industry. Birdman is all about business. He's still making money off of Cash Money Records to today. Eazy-E. Before Eazy-E became the godfather of gangster rap, he was just Eric Wright, a young hustler from Compton. The Kelly Park Compton Crips weren't just a gang in his neighborhood. They were his place, his people, his family, his lifestyle. Unlike some rappers who claim to set for industry clout, Eazy was already making money before the music. In the early 80s, crack cocaine was running the streets of LA, and Eazy saw a way to get ahead. He built connections, learned the game, and got his paper up, all while dodging the law. That's when he decided to flip the game. Instead of selling dope, he started selling music. With his street money, Eazy founded Ruthless Records and linked up with Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, MC Ren, and DJ Yella to form NWA. Their music, raw, real, and straight from the hood. But with the fame came problems. The feds were watching. The beef with Ice Cube and Dr. Dre got real, and Suge Knight was moving in, trying to take over. Eazy held his ground, but by the early 90s, the gang ties, industry drama, and business conflicts started pulling him into too many directions. Then came 1995, when Eazy was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, a shock to the whole rap world. He passed away just a month later, leaving behind a legacy that still shapes hip-hop today. MC Eiht. If you talk about real West Coast gangster rap, you gotta mention MC Eiht. He was caught up in gang activity early, affiliating with the track New Park Compton Crips. In a city where colors meant everything, Eiht was locked in with the blue side, and it showed in his music and his movement. Back in the 80s and 90s, Compton was a war zone. Turf wars, shootouts, drug raids, it was a real in the field. And MC Eiht was right in the middle of it, running his set, dodging beef, and trying to stay alive. But while most of his homies were getting caught up, he had something else on his mind: music. When he dropped Compton's Most Wanted, people started paying attention. He wasn't just spitting bars, he was telling street stories that felt too real. Songs like Hood Took Me Under and Growing Up in the Hood became anthems for anybody trying to make it out. But even with success, the streets didn't let go easy. He got into heavy beef with DJ Quik, a top tree Piru blood from the same city. The tension ran deep. The two threw shots at each other in their music, and for a while, it looked like things might turn deadly. But as the years went by, Eiht realized the gang was bigger than the gang ties. DJ Quik. DJ Quik wasn't just a rapper, he was a producer and an innovator. But before the platinum records and the classic beats, he was David Blake, a kid from Compton, caught up in the streets. And in Compton, if you wasn't with a set, you were a target. For Quik, that was the treetop Piru Bloods. But even as he ran with the Bloods, music was always his way out. He started DJing, making beats, and by the time he was a teenager, his talent was undeniable. His first album, Quik Is the Name, dropped in 1991, and it was an instant West Coast classic. He had the sound, the flow, and the production skills that put him on another level. But while his career was taking off, his beef with MC Eiht was heating up. That wasn't just rap. This was Bloods versus Crips, Compton versus Compton. Diss tracks turned into real tension, and for years, they were at each other's throats. But over time, Quik grew past it. He saw the industry was bigger than street beef, and instead of letting the gang life define him, he started working with artists from all backgrounds. He expanded into producing for legends like Tupac, Jay-Z, and Snoop Dogg, proving his skills went beyond the streets. Kurupt. Before Kurupt became one of the hardest lyricists in the West Coast rap, he was just Ricardo Emmanuel Brown, a kid moving between Philadelphia and Los Angeles. Caught between two different worlds, when he landed in LA, it didn't take long before he got wrapped up in the gang culture that ran the city. He started rolling with the Rollin' 60s Neighborhood Crips, one of the most notorious sets in the South Central. But even though he was surrounded by the street life, Kurupt had something that set him apart. His pen game was lethal. Instead of hustling on the block, he was killing verses, battling dudes in the neighborhood, and making a name for himself. By the time Death Row Records came calling, he was ready. With the Dog Pound, alongside with Dash Does Linger, Kurupt put his set on the map through music. Songs like New York, New York, and We Can Freak It weren't just anthems, they were statements. he repped blue rags heavy, but unlike some artists who let gang life define him, Kurupt was always more focused on his music than politics. He had his fair share of beefs, from death row drama to tensions with other West Coast legends, but over time, he started focusing on lyricism, business, and longevity, distancing himself from the reckless side of the streets. BG. If you know New Orleans rap, you know BG, one of the realest to ever touch the mic. He grew up in Melpomene Projects, deep in New Orleans, 3rd Ward. In a city where poverty and crime ran the streets, BG got caught up early. He was running the 3rd Ward Goonies, a crew known for hustling, handling business, and making sure nobody played with them. He was still a teenager when Cash Money Records found him. Instead of spending all his time on the block, he was in the studio, learning the game from Birdman and Mine Fresh. At just 14, he dropped his first album, but it was the Hot Boys, alongside Juvenile, Lil Wayne, and Turk, that became a household name. Even with fame, the streets never fully left him. His music was raw, straight out the gutter. With hits like Bling Bling and Cash Money is an Army, talking about the life he knew. But behind the scenes, BG was still moving in the same circles, and it wasn't long before the law caught up to him. In 2009, he was arrested on gun charges, and in 2012, he was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. But instead of folding, he did his time like a soldier. Freddie Gibbs. Freddie Gibbs grew up in Gary, Indiana, one of the roughest cities in America. In Gary, gangs runs deep, and Gibbs had ties to both vice lords and gangster disciples. He wasn't just repping for show. He was really in the mix, hustling, catching cases, and getting into heavy street businesses. He got kicked out of college and started running the block. But street life comes with consequences, and by his early 20s, Gibbs was staring at real prison time. That's when he had to make a choice: keep running in circles or put everything into music. He chose the mic, but getting into the industry wasn't easy. He got signed, then dropped, and for a while, it looked like his career was over before he even started. But Gibbs ain't the type to fold. He went independent, started dropping mixtapes, and before long, his name was buzzing. Albums like ESGN, Shadow of a Doubt, and Bandana with Madlib proved he wasn't just another rapper. He was a force in the game. Even with success, the streets never stopped following him. In 2014, he survived a drive-by shooting in Brooklyn. In 2016, he got hit with legal trouble in Europe, facing serious charges before finally getting cleared. He's now focusing on dropping classic albums and acting in TV shows. Schoolboy Q. Before Schoolboy Q became a lyrical powerhouse, he was just Quincy Matthew Hanley, a kid growing up in South Central LA. His neighborhood was Hoover Crip territory, and by the time he was in high school, he was already running with the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips. Q was really out there, putting in work and living the life he later rapped about. But just like a lot of young gangbangers, it just didn't take long for the law to catch up. He got booked for gun charges, spent time locked up, and started realizing that the streets wasn't a retirement plan. It was a dead end. That's when music started calling. At first, rapping was just something to do, a way to pass time, but then he saw his homies like Kendrick Lamar and J-Rock making real moves. That's when he linked up with Top Dawg Entertainment, TDE, and everything changed. By the time he dropped Setbacks, people started paying attention. And it was habits and contradictions and oxymoron that made it clear Schoolboy Q wasn't just another LA rapper. He was one of the best doing it. Even though he had gang ties in his past, he made it clear in interviews he wasn't trying to glorify the life. He was just trying to tell his story. J-Rock. If anybody knows about going from the trenches to the top, it's J-Rock. Born and raised in Nickerson Gardens, Watts, he grew up in one of the toughest housing projects in LA. The Bounty Hunter Bloods ran the area, and J-Rock was right in the middle of it. J-Rock was hustling, ducking cops, and dealing with the realities of gang life. But even in the middle of the madness, music was always there. He had a natural talent, and once he got serious, he caught the attention of Top Dawg Entertainment, TDE. At first, he was TDE's main focus, dropping street anthems like All My Life, Ghetto, featuring Lil Wayne, But then Kendrick Lamar blew up and Rock found himself in the background. Instead of beefing or giving up, he stayed patient, kept grinding, and waited for his moment. That moment came with Redemption, an album that solidified him as a real force in hip-hop. Tracks like When and King's Dead proved he was a problem all by himself. Even though J-Rock's past is tied to Bloods, he made it clear the gang life gave him grit, but music was his purpose. Glasses Malone. Glasses Malone has never shed away from the fact that he was deep in the streets before rap. Born Charles Philip Ivory Penniman, he came up in Watts, and he was a full-fledged member of the 7th Street's Watts Crips. Unlike some rappers who talked about gang life from a distance, Glasses lived it. He was hustling street businesses, and making sure that his name rang out in the city. But after losing too many homies to the cycle, he started looking at life differently. Music became his way out, and by the mid-2000s, he started gaining buzz. His street cred was solid, and when he dropped Certified, the industry soon took notice. Soon, he was getting co-signs from Lil Wayne, Mac 10, and even Dr. Dre. But unlike a lot of the West Coast rappers, Glasses never went mainstream. He stayed independent, kept his street credibility intact, and focused on telling real hood stories without the industry politics. Lil Baby. Before Lil Baby became one of the biggest names in rap, he was just Dominique Jones, a kid growing up in Atlanta's Southwest neighborhood. The Bloods ran deep in his section, and like a lot of other young dudes in the city, he got caught up early. He wasn't focused on rap at first. He was just in the mix, hustling and making money the only way he knew how. By his late teens, Baby was already moving reckless, stacking up cases and spending time in and out of jail. His last big came in 2015 when he got locked up for 2 years. That's when everything started to shift. His homies, Young Thug, Coach K, and P from Quality Control kept telling him that he had the voice and the presence to make it in rap. At first, he wasn't trying to hear it, but when he got out in 2017, he decided to give it a shot. And just like that, Baby took over the game. His debut mixtape, Perfect Timing, was an instant street classic. And when My Dog and Freestyle started blowing up, it was clear Baby was here to stay. Fredo Santana. Fredo Santana was more than just Chief Keef's cousin. He was a major figure in Chicago drill music. Someone who actually lived every bar he rapped. Born Derek Coleman, he grew up in Chicago's South Side, where the Black Disciples were deep. His presence in Chirac drill scene was different. While Keef was blowing up, Fredo was the enforcer, the one who made sure things stayed solid behind the scenes. But instead of just being the muscle, he realized he could take rap seriously too. In 2013, he dropped Trappin' Ain't Dead. And just like that, people knew he wasn't just Keef's backup. He was also his own artist. But the street life never really lets go. Fredo was still deep in gang culture, and like many in Chicago, he faced the consequences. He lost close homies, dealt with legal troubles, and got up in heavy drug use. Lean, Xanax, and pills became his way of coping with PTSD from losing so many people. In 2018, his body couldn't take it no more. Fredo Santana passed away at just 27 years old from a fatal seizure. Chief Keef. If there's one rapper who truly changed the game of street rap, it's Chief Keef. Born Keith Cozart, he was raised in Chicago's O Block, one of the most infamous areas in the city. The Black Disciples ran his neighborhood, and Keef wasn't just affiliated. He was one of the young faces of the movement. By the time he was 16, Keef was already making music and making headlines. His breakout song, I Don't Like, wasn't just a hit. It was an anthem for the streets, putting Chicago drill music on the map. But with the fame came problems. His gang ties were no secret, and the city saw him as a symbol of everything wrong with drill culture. The legal system started cracking down. He got hit with gun charges, house arrest, and eventually probation violations. Instead of staying in Chicago, Keef moved to Los Angeles, trying to distance himself from the street wars that were following him. He was still Black Disciple to the core, but he realized he couldn't just keep living in that cycle. After moving out of Chicago, Keef built his own label, Glow Gang, and turned his street reputation into a long-lasting career. King Louie. Before King Louie became one of the pioneers of Chicago drill music, he was just Louis King Johnson Jr., a kid growing up in the South Side. The Gangsta Disciples had a strong presence in his neighborhood, and like a lot of other young dudes in the city, he got caught up in it early. But unlike a lot of his homies that were focused solely on streets, he had a vision beyond the block. Even while dodging beef and watching his friends lose their lives to gun violence, he started pulling all of his energy into music. By the time drill music was blowing up, King Louie was one of the first to really make noise in the industry. Tracks like Too Cool and Live and Die in Chicago put him on the map. His buzz got so big that Kanye West even co-signed him, bringing him in to work on the Life of Pablo album. But being a drill rapper in the scene of Chicago wasn't just about making music. It meant dealing with real life consequences. In 2015, Louie was shot in the head while sitting in his car. Miraculously, he survived, but that was the moment everything changed. He was not in the mix like before. He's focused on his independent label, business ventures, and staying out of the politics that almost got him killed. Boosie Badazz. Boosie Badazz came up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the Bloods had a strong presence, and Boosie found himself deep in their life early on. Boosie was dealing with the type of street business that put people in the grave or behind bars. Even when he started rapping, he was still knee-deep in the game, balancing the booth and the block. His music told the raw truth about street life, and people related to it. Songs like Set It Off and Mind of the Maniac weren't just tracks. They were real-life stories. But Boosie's rise in music didn't stop him from getting caught up in the system. In 2009, he got hit with a drug and gun charge, and by 2010, he was indicted for first-degree murder. Facing the death penalty, Boosie filed his case and eventually was acquitted, but he still got sentenced to 8 years on separate charges. He did 5 years behind bars before finally getting released in 2014. And when he came home, he made a promise. He wasn't going back. YG been Treetop Pyru since before the fame. He got caught up early, hitting licks, running with the homies, and getting locked up. But unlike a lot of the young gangbangers who never made it out, YG had something else: rap. Even while he was in the streets, he was making music, and in 2009, he dropped Toot It and Boot It, a song that blew up and caught the attention of Def Jam Records. At first, people thought YG was just another party rapper, but he had more to say. His debut album, My Crazy Life, was a real look into gang life, and with tracks like Big and Back Being Bull and Who Do You Love, showing both the highs and lows of their lifestyle. But with success came real life problems. His beef with DJ Mustard, industry politics, and even attempt of shooting at his home in 2015 made it clear YG couldn't keep moving the same way. Over time, he started shifting his focus. Instead of just being a blood rapper, he became a voice for the streets, dropping politically charged songs like FDT, Fuck Donald Trump, using his platform to speak out on real issues. Mozzy. Before Mozzy became one of the rawest storytellers in rap, he was just Timothy Patterson, a kid growing up in Sacramento Oak Park's neighborhood where the Bloods ran deep. The Oak Park Bloods weren't just a crew, they were his family. His first few years in rap, nobody was checking for him. The streets had his full attention, and the law wasn't far behind. Between 2005 and 2008, he was in and out of jail for gun charges, drug possessions, and gang-related activity. Every time he got locked up, he thought about rap. But the second he was out, he was right back in the mix. But then, something changed. He saw how the streets weren't leading him nowhere, just jail, the grave, or another case. That's when he went all in on music, dropping tapes back to back. By the time Blah Da Da came out in 2015, Mozzy had the whole West Coast paying attention. He built his Hell Gang movement, started signing artists, and took his career to the next level. Slim Thug. Slim Thug was always built different. Standing at 6'6", he looked like a problem before he even said a word. He came up in North Houston, an area where the Rolling 50 Crips held weight. Unlike a lot of young dudes who got into the life for survival, Slim had another motivation: power and respect. By his teenage years, he was already getting money and making moves. By the early 2000s, Houston's rap scene was blowing up and Slim Thug was leading the change. Instead of signing a major deal and letting the industry take his money, he built his own lane, pushing music independently and stacking millions before rappers even saw a check. His album, already platinum, was just a pure flex. He was rich before the industry even took notice. While his gang ties were real, Slim was always about business first. He made smart investments, stayed away from unnecessary drama, and made sure he wasn't just another rapper who ended up broke, in prison, or worse, dead. Trey the Truth. If there's one thing about Trey the Truth, it's that he moves with purpose. Born Fraser Othell Thompson III, he came up in Houston's South Side, where the streets shaped everything. He was running with the ABN, Asshole by Nature crew, a group that was deep in the city's underground scene. Early in his career, Trey was known for his aggression, his street ties, and his ability to bring the city together. But with that reputation came problems. He got into beefs, had industry drama, and even got banned from local Houston radio stations after a fallout with local DJs. Most rappers would have faded away after something like that, but not Trey. Instead of relying on the industry, he built his own movement, dropping music independently, building his brand, and putting on for Houston without needing radio support. His music was real, unfiltered, and straight from the streets, with tracks like Swing and Restless proving that he wasn't just another Southern rapper. He was a voice for the struggle. But over time, Trey's focus shifted. He realized he could use his platform from something bigger than music. He became one of hip-hop's most active community leaders, stepping up during natural disasters, protests, and social justice movements. He even started Relief Gang, a nonprofit that helps families in need across Texas.